When did the ghost of family chaos demand your hard-won piece? It started, as many nightmares do, with a phone call, not the ringing itself, but the dread-filled silence that followed when I picked up and recognized the voice on the other end. A voice that carried the weight of a decade of unspoken resentments and the simmering promise of absolute chaos. I'd spent years cultivating a meticulous distance from my family, a carefully constructed fortress of independence, and now it felt like a single, careless word was about to blow a hole clean through my wall, forcing me to choose between loyalty to someone who'd always been nothing short of a ghost, and the fragile peace I'd fought so hard to build. Problem wasn't just about making a choice. It was about the sickening realization that any choice I made would be the wrong one for somebody I cared about, even if that caring was buried under layers of frustration and disappointment. My name is Charlotte Henderson, 29F, and my life had finally settled into a predictable rhythm, a comfortable hum of routine that, for the first time in what felt like forever, didn't involve any form of crisis management or emotional firefighting. I managed the front of house at the Copper Kettle, a moderately upscale bistro downtown, the kind of place that prided itself on artisanal bread and locally sourced ingredients, which basically meant the profit margins were thin and the customers were particular. My apartment, small but mine, was a short bus ride away, a haven of mismatched furniture and a surprisingly robust collection of houseplants that I hadn't managed to kill yet. My social life was a pleasant mix of quiet evenings with my cat and occasional dinners with my colleague Eugene O'Neill, 29M, our head chef, a man who cooked with the intensity of a surgeon and spoke with the measured wisdom of someone who'd seen too much, but somehow still believed in the inherent goodness of a perfectly seared scallop. He was my anchor in many ways, the steady force that reminded me that not every relationship had to be a high-wire act. The call, when it came, was from my brother, Bobby Perry, 46M. Bobby, my older, considerably more successful, and perpetually aggrieved brother. He wasn't just older. He was the firstborn, the golden child, the one who'd seemingly absorbed all the ambition genes in our family, leaving me with a rather unfortunate predisposition for conflict avoidance and a talent for making truly excellent coffee. Built an empire, or at least a regional chain of high-end car dealerships, from the ground up, all while subtly implying, with every carefully phrased compliment and every thinly veiled piece of advice, that I was somehow falling short of my potential by choosing a career in hospitality. His calls were rare, reserved for major family milestones, birthdays, holidays, the occasional funeral, or, as I'd learned to my cost, for when he needed something. This time, his voice was tight, clipped, the kind of tone that usually preceded a lecture or a demand. "Charlotte," he'd said without preamble, "I need to talk to you. Something important has come up and it concerns Thomas." My stomach clenched. Thomas Bailey, 21M. The name hung in the air, thick with unspoken history. Thomas, my childhood hero, my fiercely protective, slightly wild older cousin who'd effectively disappeared from our lives a decade ago. He was the kind of person who radiated a sort of untamed energy, a magnetic force that drew trouble, but also loyalty. When we were kids, he was the one who taught me how to climb the tallest oak in our grandmother's yard, who shielded me from Bobby's sometimes overbearing nature, who made me feel seen and important in a world that often made me feel small. It vanished after a particularly ugly incident involving a stolen car and a very lenient judge, leaving behind a gaping hole in my adolescence and a lot of unanswered questions. No one talked about him much, certainly not Bobby, who'd always viewed Thomas as a black mark on the family's otherwise pristine reputation. The fact that Bobby was bringing him up meant something serious was brewing. "Thomas," I managed, my voice a little higher than I'd intended. "What about him? Is he okay?" "Define okay," Bobby had retorted, his usual sardonic edge sharper than usual. "Look, it's complicated. I can't discuss this over the phone. I need you to meet me, tonight, at the Copper Kettle. After closing, the Copper Kettle, my sanctuary, the place I felt most in control." Bobby knew this. He was deliberately invading my territory, asserting his dominance even in his request. It was a classic Bobby move. The after-closing part meant it was serious, too sensitive for the bustling noise of dinner service. It felt like a trap, and I was already walking into it. "Bobby, you know how busy," I started, but he cut me off. "This isn't negotiable, Charlotte, and bring Thomas. He'll be with me, just be there." And then he hung up before I could object further. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of menu explanations, wine recommendations, and internal panic. My hands trembled slightly as I polished silverware. My smile felt plastered on. Eugene noticed, of course. He always did. He had a way of seeing past the polite facade I usually presented to the world. "Rough night, Henderson?" he asked, his voice low, as he passed by the host's stand, wiping down a stainless steel counter with an almost meditative focus. His dark hair was pulled back from his face, a few strands escaping, and his uniform was impeccably clean despite hours in a hot kitchen. I sighed, leaning against the polished wood. "You could say that, family drama, the worst kind." He nodded, not pushing for details, just offering a quiet, comforting presence. That was Eugene. He didn't offer empty platitudes or unsolicited advice. He just offered space and the knowledge that he was there if I needed him. "Anything I can do? Just keep the kitchen running smoothly." "I might need the distraction," I admitted, a weak smile touching my lips. He gave a small, understanding nod and disappeared back into the controlled chaos of his domain. Closing up the Copper Kettle was usually a comforting ritual, a winding down after the frenetic energy of the evening. Tonight, it felt like preparing for an interrogation. I turned off the last of the ambient lighting, leaving only the soft glow of the kitchen prep lights and the faint hum of the refrigerators. The usually welcoming silence of the empty restaurant felt charged, heavy with anticipation. I found myself pacing, picking at a loose thread on my uniform, a nervous habit I hadn't indulged in since my early 20s. Then, the chime above the door announced their arrival. Bobby walked in first, his posture rigid, his expensive suit looking a little rumpled, a rare sight. He carried an air of barely contained frustration, his jaw clenched. And then behind him was Thomas. My breath hitched. He was older, of course, not the gangly, reckless teenager I remembered. His face was leaner, etched with lines I didn't recognize, shadows under his eyes that spoke of exhaustion or worry. His once bright eyes, the color of warm honey, seemed duller, wary. He was dressed in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, a stark contrast to Bobby's polished appearance. He looked haunted, but it was definitely him. The same unruly dark hair, the same slight slouch in his shoulders, the same almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. "Charlotte," Bobby said, his voice flat, bypassing any pleasantries. "Thanks for meeting us." He didn't look at Thomas, not directly, as if the sight of him was distasteful. Thomas just stood there awkwardly, his gaze darting around the restaurant, avoiding my eyes. He looked like he wanted to bolt. "Thomas," I managed, my voice soft, trying to bridge the gap of years. "It's good to see you." It was a lie. It wasn't good to see him like this, clearly distressed, clearly under Bobby's thumb. But part of me, the part that remembered the confident, carefree boy, still ached for him. He offered a weak, lopsided smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Charlotte, long time." Bobby gestured towards one of the secluded booths in the back, the ones we usually reserved for power lunches and discreet affairs. "Sit, both of you, we need to talk." We sat, me opposite Bobby, Thomas beside me. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, punctuated only by the distant hum of the kitchen's ventilation system. Bobby pulled out a sleek leather briefcase, placed it on the table, and with a decisive click, opened it. Produced a thick stack of papers, legal documents by the looks of them, and spread them across the table. "This," Bobby began, his voice taking on the clipped, authoritative tone he reserved for business negotiations, "is why we're here. This is a mess, Charlotte, a complete disaster." My eyes flickered from Bobby's stern face to Thomas's downcast one. Thomas was picking at a loose thread on his jeans, refusing to meet my gaze. His shoulders were hunched, as if trying to shrink into himself. "Thomas here," Bobby continued, and the accusation in his voice was palpable, "has gotten himself into a serious predicament. One that, unfortunately, implicates the entire family." I waited, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I knew Thomas had a history of making bad decisions, but implicates the entire family sounded far worse than his usual petty trouble. Bobby pushed a document across the table towards me. It was a credit report. My eyes scanned the header. My name, Charlotte Henderson, and then below it a list of credit cards, loans, and outstanding debts that made my blood run cold. Accounts I'd never opened, addresses I'd never lived at, credit inquiries from banks I'd never dealt with. And the balances, they were astronomical. Tens of thousands of dollars. What is this?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. A cold dread was creeping up my spine. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a nightmare. Bobby leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense rumble. "This, Charlotte, is the result of someone using your identity to open accounts, take out loans, and rack up debts. And that someone," he paused, his gaze fixed on Thomas, who flinched as if struck, "is Thomas." The words hit me like a physical blow. Identity theft. And Thomas, my childhood hero, the protector. The one who was supposed to be the good one despite his rough edges. My mind reeled, trying to process the information. Didn't make sense. Thomas wouldn't. He couldn't. I turned to Thomas, my voice trembling. "Thomas, is this true? Did you do this?" He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate shame. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Charlotte, I can explain. It wasn't like that, I swear." His voice was a ragged whisper, laced with a plea for understanding. "Explain what, Thomas?" Bobby interjected, his voice sharp, devoid of any sympathy. "Explain how you got hold of Charlotte's social security number. Explain why you thought it was acceptable to ruin her financial future. Explain the fraudulent loans and the maxed-out credit cards." "I was desperate, Bobby," Thomas pleaded, his gaze fixed on his cousin. "I was in trouble, big trouble, and I didn't know what else to do. I needed money fast, and Charlotte. She was the only one I thought. The only one who wouldn't notice right away, who had a clean slate. I never meant for it to get this far. I was going to pay it back, all of it." My mind flashed back to the credit report, the astronomical sums. Pay it back? How? He was clearly struggling, his clothes worn, his demeanor defeated. This wasn't the Thomas I remembered, the one who always had a plan, however reckless. This was a broken man. "You didn't notice?" I repeated, my voice rising, a wave of anger beginning to crest over the initial shock. "Thomas, my credit score is probably in the toilet. This could affect everything. Loans, a mortgage, future jobs." The full weight of his betrayal was starting to sink in, a cold, bitter feeling spreading through my chest. I know, Charlotte, and I am so sorry," he stammered, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I messed up, badly, but I'm trying to fix it. That's why Bobby brought me here. We have a plan." A plan. The word felt hollow. What kind of plan could fix something like this? What kind of plan involved Bobby, the architect of cold, hard logic, and Thomas, the master of chaotic self-destruction, sitting together in my restaurant after hours? Bobby cleared his throat, pulling my attention back to him. "The plan is this, Charlotte. Thomas is in deep with some very unsavory people. He owes them a lot of money, more than he could ever earn. Identity theft was a last-ditch effort to try and cover some of it, but it just made things worse. They found out, they're threatening him, and by extension us. They've linked his past addresses to ours, found out about our connection. They know who he's related to." My blood ran cold. Unsavory people, threats. This was far beyond a simple debt. This was dangerous. "So what's the plan, Bobby?" I asked, my voice tight, my gaze darting between the two men. Thomas looked terrified, his eyes wide and pleading. Bobby pushed another document across the table. This one was a partnership agreement, and it had the Copper Kettle's name at the top. "Thomas needs a legitimate income, a clean slate, and a way to quickly pay back these creditors," Bobby explained, his voice devoid of emotion, like he was presenting a quarterly report. He's going to work for me as a manager at one of my dealerships, but that won't be enough. He also needs a secondary, less traceable income stream. And that's where you come in, Charlotte. My eyes widened as I looked at the partnership agreement. It wasn't just a partnership. It was a complete overhaul of the restaurant's finances, turning it into some kind of shell company or a front. It would give Bobby significant control, and by extension Thomas, access to the Copper Kettle's resources. It was a thinly veiled attempt to funnel money through my restaurant, money that I suspected was not entirely legitimate. It was a violation of everything I'd built, everything I believed in. You want to use my restaurant? I asked, disbelief and anger warring in my voice. You want to launder money through the Copper Kettle? Bobby, this is insane. This isn't just about Thomas's debt anymore. This is criminal. What about Eugene? What about our reputation? What about my career? Bobby held up a hand, silencing me. Calm down, Charlotte. It's not laundering money. It's a temporary financial restructuring, a way to legitimize Thomas's income and make substantial payments to clear his debts. Debts that, I might remind you, were incurred in your asterisk name. If we don't do this, they won't just come for Thomas. They'll come for us, for you. And you really think I'd let that happen? I was trying to appeal to my sense of self-preservation, my protective instincts, but it just felt like manipulation. And if I say no, I challenged, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and defiance. What then? Do I just let Thomas ruin my life, then watch him disappear again? Do I let you turn my restaurant into this? Bobby leaned back, a cold, calculated look in his eyes. If you say no, Charlotte, then you're on your own. Thomas will be on his own. I will not intervene. You'll be left with all these debts, all these problems, and a target on your back you didn't even know you had. And Thomas, well, let's just say his options will be extremely limited. You think I want to do this? This is damage control for all of us. Thomas shifted beside me, his face pale, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. Charlotte, please, it's the only way. Bobby's right there, not playing around. Don't want to drag you into this any more than I already have, but if you don't, I don't know what will happen to me, to you. His words, choked with fear, resonated with the childhood memories of him protecting me. He wasn't the confident hero anymore, but a scared kid who'd made terrible choices. And now I was somehow responsible for his survival, for the mess he'd created, a mess that now threatened to consume me too. Moral dilemma that had started with a phone call had just escalated into a terrifying, impossible choice. Help Thomas and compromise everything I'd worked for, potentially risking my freedom and reputation, or refuse and leave him to face dangerous consequences, knowing his actions had already entangled me in the financial wreckage. My head was spinning. The air in the restaurant felt thick, suffocating. I looked from Bobby's unyielding face to Thomas's pleading one. My restaurant, my safe space, was now a chessboard, and I was just a pawn in a game I didn't understand, a game with stakes that felt impossibly high. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I just sat there, trapped, the cold reality of my options settling over me like a shroud. My head was spinning. The air in the restaurant felt thick, suffocating. I looked from Bobby's unyielding face to Thomas's pleading one. My restaurant, my safe space, was now a chessboard, and I was just a pawn in a game I didn't understand, a game with stakes that felt impossibly high. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but I just sat there, trapped, the cold reality of my options settling over me like a shroud. Give me a minute, I managed, my voice hoarse, pushing back from the table. I needed to breathe, to think. I walked towards the front door, not to leave, but to gain some distance to feel the cool glass against my hand. The city outside was quiet, the late-night traffic a distant hum. This couldn't be happening. My carefully constructed life, the quiet hum I'd cultivated, was dissolving under the weight of someone else's desperate choices and someone else's ruthless solutions. Thomas was my hero once. The thought felt like a distant echo, a ghost from a past that now seemed impossibly naive. He was the one who taught me about freedom, about not letting anyone tell you what you were worth. Now he was a desperate, shivering mess, begging me to sacrifice everything I valued to save him from a self-made hell. And Bobby, ever the pragmatist, was offering a devil's bargain, cloaked in familial concern, but with threads of pure, cold opportunism woven through it. He wasn't just saving Thomas. He was attempting to absorb another asset into his empire, under the guise of crisis management. I turned back to them, my gaze sweeping over the polished floors, the neatly stacked chairs, the quiet elegance of the Copper Kettle. This wasn't just a building. It was a testament to my hard work, my independence. I had poured years of my life into this place, learned every aspect of the business, built relationships with suppliers, nurtured a loyal staff. Allow it to become a front for shady dealings, to risk everything for Thomas' recklessness and Bobby's control, felt like a fundamental betrayal of myself. I can't, I said, the words feeling heavy on my tongue but firm. I can't do it, not like that. I won't turn the Copper Kettle into a criminal enterprise. Bobby's face hardened, his jaw clenching. Charlotte, be realistic. This isn't a choice between right and wrong. It's a choice between bad and catastrophic. If you don't agree, Thomas is as good as dead, and you'll be left with crippling debt and a target on your back. There has to be another way, I insisted, my voice gaining strength. The anger was rising now, pushing back against the fear. You think I'm just going to roll over and let you destroy my life and my business because Thomas made a terrible decision? I am not a pawn, Bobby. Thomas, who had been silent, slumped in the booth, finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Charlotte, please. He's right, there's no other way. They're coming for me, they know everything. How much money are we talking about, Thomas? I asked, looking him squarely in the eye. Exactly how much do you owe these people? He hesitated, then mumbled, 50,000 plus. Interest, it's compounding. 50,000. It was an impossible sum, not for Bobby. But clearly, Bobby wanted to leverage this far beyond just helping Thomas. No, I repeated, shaking my head. I will not put the Copper Kettle at risk. I will not compromise Eugene or my staff. I will not break the law for this, but I will help you, Thomas. I'll help you find a way to pay this back legitimately. And I'll deal with the identity theft legally, Bobby scoffed. Legitimately? Are you insane? He can't earn $50,000 in a year, let alone quickly enough to satisfy these people. And you're going to pay off his debts with what? Your artisanal bread sales. No, I said, looking directly at Bobby, my gaze unwavering. Not me, him, and not through my restaurant, not through illegal means. You said you were going to make him a manager at your dealership, Bobby. A legitimate job, that's a start. Well, maximize that income. Well, make a payment plan. And Thomas, I turned to my cousin, you will go to the police about the threats, and you will work with me to undo the damage you've done to my credit. Every single penny. I will not be liable for your mistakes, but I will help you stand on your own 2 feet, once and for all. Thomas looked bewildered, but a flicker of something, hope perhaps, or just confusion crossed his face. Bobby, however, was furious. You're being naive, Charlotte, he seethed. You don't understand the kind of people we're dealing with. They don't do payment plans. They don't wait around for someone to stand on their own 2 feet. They collect. Then you, Bobby, with all your connections and your damage control, will have to make them understand, I retorted, standing my ground. You found him, you brought him here, you outlined the problem. Now, if you truly want to protect the family name and not just expand your illicit reach, you will help him negotiate a realistic path out of this, a legal one. Otherwise, I will go to the police myself about the identity theft. If Thomas is threatened, if he truly is in danger, I will report that too. I am not going to be complicit in a crime, not for you, not for him. The restaurant felt charged with our unspoken history, the power dynamic shifting. For years, I had deferred to Bobby, let him dictate terms, allowed his judgment to overshadow mine. But this was my line in the sand. My livelihood, my integrity, my freedom. Bobby stared at me, his eyes narrowed, calculating. Knew I wasn't bluffing about going to the police. The thought of a family scandal, especially one involving his golden child image and potentially linking him to unsavory people, was something he could not abide. He prided himself on his impeccable reputation, however ruthlessly he'd built it. He finally let out a long, frustrated sigh. Fine, he bit out, the word dripping with resentment. But if this blows up, Charlotte, it's on you. And when I say blow up, I mean people getting hurt. I mean everything you've built here gone, you understand that. I understand the risks, I said, my voice calmer now, the adrenaline beginning to ebb. But I also understand what I'm willing to lose and what I'm not. The Copper Kettle is not for sale, not as a front, not as a shell company, and not as a bargaining chip for your power games. We will help Thomas, but we will do it my way. Thomas, pale and shaking, looked at me, then at Bobby. He seemed utterly overwhelmed, but also, for the first time in a long time, maybe a little hopeful. 2 weeks later, the air in the Copper Kettle felt lighter, though the underlying tension hadn't fully dissipated. My conversation with Bobby had been the catalyst for a fundamental shift in my approach. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was strategizing. The first thing I did was make an appointment with a credit repair specialist. It was a long, arduous process, involving filing dispute after dispute, gathering evidence, and making countless phone calls. Thomas provided me with the details he remembered about the fraudulent accounts, and it was clear his method had been crude, desperate, and ultimately easily traceable. The amounts were horrifying, but the sheer volume of small, individual transactions, often for things like groceries or cheap motel rooms, painted a picture of a man living hand-to-mouth, not a mastermind. This wasn't sophisticated identity theft, it was a desperate gamble. During those initial days, Thomas was a shadow, perpetually nervous, flinching at every unexpected sound. He rarely spoke unless spoken to, and even then, his answers were clipped, apologetic. Bobby had, grudgingly, secured him a manager position at one of his dealerships. It was a glorified gopher role, but it provided a legitimate income, and Thomas was living in a small, furnished apartment Bobby had arranged under strict conditions. He was also under Bobby's constant surveillance, which, while smothering, also offered a strange kind of protection. Eugene, true to his nature, was my quiet rock. I had confided in him, sketching out the bare bones of the situation, Thomas's debt, the threats, Bobby's drastic solution, and my refusal. I left out the more unsavory details of Bobby's proposed financial restructuring, but explained the core dilemma. He listened, his hands meticulously kneading dough for the evening's bread, his expression thoughtful. So, you chose the harder path, he observed, his voice calm, pragmatic. The path of integrity. It felt like the only path I could live with, I admitted, rubbing my temples. But now what? How do we actually do this? You set boundaries with Bobby, that's step one, Eugene said, wiping his hands on his apron. And you have. Now, Thomas, he needs more than just a job. He needs structure, purpose. He needs to face the music, Charlotte, not just run from it. This conversation shifted my perspective. Eugene wasn't just offering emotional support, he was offering practical wisdom. He was helping me see beyond the immediate crisis to the deeper problems, reminded me of the resilience he often showed in the kitchen, turning chaos into order, one precise movement at a time. A few days later, I approached Thomas, not with anger, but with a firm resolution. Thomas, I said, we need to talk. You need to come to my apartment every Tuesday and Thursday evening. We're going to go through every single one of these credit disputes. You're going to write down everything you remember about opening these accounts. We're going to build a case. And then we're going to work on a budget. Every penny you earn from Bobby, we're going to allocate to pay back these people, and to slowly, painfully rebuild my credit. He looked startled. My income, you mean? You're not going to just let Bobby handle it. Bobby handles it his way, I said. This is our asterisk way. You owe me, Thomas, not just financially, but ethically. You put my life on the line. Now you're going to help me fix it. You're going to learn how to manage your life, because clearly you haven't been doing a great job of it. He flinched, but then, surprisingly, a hint of resolve appeared in his eyes. Okay, Charlotte, whatever you need, I messed up. I'll do whatever it takes. This was the first real glimmer of the old Thomas, the one who took responsibility, albeit after significant prodding. It wasn't the heroic Thomas, but it was a more honest, vulnerable version, one I could work with. A month had passed since that fraught night in the restaurant. Thomas was dutifully showing up at my apartment twice a week. He was still awkward, but less withdrawn. We'd spent hours poring over credit reports, filling out forms, writing letters. He recounted the desperate decisions that led him down this path, a series of bad investments, escalating gambling debts, and then a fallout with some truly unpleasant characters who offered loans with impossibly high interest rates, revealed a deep-seated fear of failure, a feeling of inadequacy compared to Bobby's success, which had driven him to increasingly desperate measures to project an image of competence. My perception of him shifted from hero to betrayer to deeply flawed human being caught in a trap of his own making. He wasn't just a victim, he was an active participant in his own downfall, but also genuinely regretful. One evening, after reviewing some particularly damning loan documents, Thomas looked up, his eyes meeting mine for the first time without shame. "Charlotte," he said, his voice surprisingly steady, "I know I messed up your life, badly, and I hate that I did that to you, but thank you for not just giving up on me or letting Bobby just swallow me whole. This feels real, like I'm actually doing something to fix it." It was a small moment, but significant. It showed a shift in him, a growing willingness to engage with his reality. I realized then that my decision to set firm boundaries wasn't just about protecting myself. It was also about offering Thomas a chance at genuine redemption, not just a temporary reprieve bought by Bobby's dubious means. My own character development was happening in tandem. I was no longer the reluctant mediator. I was an active participant, demanding accountability, setting terms. Constant battles with the credit bureaus, the phone calls to collection agencies, were exhausting, but each small victory, a disputed charge removed, an account closed, reinforced my resolve. I was taking control, not just of my finances, but of my narrative. I realized I had often let others' problems become my own or let their personalities, like Bobby's dominance or Thomas's charming recklessness, dictate my responses. This time, I was dictating the terms. One afternoon, Bobby called. His tone was clipped as usual, but there was a hint of grudging respect, or perhaps just exasperation in his voice. "Charlotte," he began, "Thomas's creditors are surprisingly amenable to the repayment plan we presented. Your meticulously detailed breakdown of his current income and proposed payments, along with my rather firm explanation of family reputation, seems to have worked. They'll monitor his payments. If he misses one, however, all bets are off." "Good," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. It meant the immediate physical threat was diffused. "He won't miss one. He's working hard, and he's managing his money. I'm making sure of it." So I hear," Bobby mused. "You've certainly changed, Charlotte. You're not as easy to push around as you used to be." It wasn't a compliment, not exactly, but it felt like a victory. People grow, Bobby. Sometimes they have to. The identity theft wasn't resolved overnight. It was a marathon, not a sprint. My credit score, once gleaming, remained bruised, a constant reminder of Thomas's betrayal. But it was slowly, painstakingly improving. I installed credit monitoring services, froze my credit, and diligently continued the paperwork. It was a long road, but it was my asterisk road, and I was walking it on my own terms. As for Thomas, he slowly began to rebuild. He continued working for Bobby, surprisingly diligently. He still had a long way to go to truly shed the years of bad habits, but there were small, observable changes. He started asking me for advice on managing his meager, discretionary income. He even offered to help out at the Copper Kettle on his days off, something I initially scoffed at, but eventually allowed. He wasn't a natural in hospitality, but he showed up, he was reliable, and he genuinely tried. Eugene, observing his progress, even offered him a few basic kitchen tasks, teaching him how to chop vegetables with precision. It was a long way from the glamorous hero of my childhood, but it was a start, a painful, messy, but real path towards becoming a more responsible adult. The Copper Kettle continued to thrive, untouched by the shadows of my family's drama. I still managed the front of house, still found solace in the hum of routine, but now there was an added layer of confidence, a quiet strength. I had faced a profound betrayal, a significant threat, and a manipulative sibling, and I hadn't crumbled. I hadn't compromised my values. I had set firm boundaries, endured the discomfort, and found a way forward that, while imperfect and ongoing, was fundamentally honest. The peace I'd fought so hard to build was fragile, yes, but it was now built on a foundation of my own integrity, rather than a carefully constructed distance. The nightmare hadn't ended, not entirely, but I was no longer just waiting for it to consume me. I was actively, stubbornly reshaping it, one firm boundary at a time.